Hey guys, welcome back to the Far Better Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Clark, and today we are continuing our season-long study of quitting. We've entitled this season Far Better by Quitting, and this is September 11th, 2024. It is crazy to think, just as a side note, that it has been, 23 years since 9/11. I was 8 when that happened. Matt, when you have a chance, I don't know how old you were and where you were, but I remember being in second grade and just thinking, what is happening? They send us home early. My mom won't let me watch TV. And here we are. It's 23 years later, and there's just as much turmoil in our world as there was then. We certainly need the Lord. So without further ado, I want to go ahead and introduce Matt into this episode. He's been on the program before. He's been on the network for a few years now. Matt, tell us who you are and what you do with Scattered Abroad.
Well, of course, Matt McBrayer. I have a couple of podcasts that I do with Scattered Abroad. I think, namely, I've started off doing Father Time with Chase Green, and Scott Kane was part of that at the beginning. But then, I've got an Ironworks podcast that I've done with Ryan Beavers. And then also, I think probably the main thing that everybody talks about, at least, is Days Gone By, where we take some older sermons from somebody who has gone on to their reward, and we take one of their sermons and we play it. And it's really great. I like that one. It's kind of hard. We talk about this, like, I think all the hosts talk about this to some degree. That's kind of hard to promote yourself. You kind of feel like you're promoting yourself. I don't feel like I'm promoting myself at all when I'm doing Days Gone By, and so it's great.
Right.
I love it. I'm like, these are great sermons from other guys, So I don't put anything into that. I just introduce it, kind of talk about the lesson a little bit, or I talk about the person a little bit, and then we just jump on in and do the lesson. So I enjoy that, so it's good.
Well, and I'm certainly thankful. It's been an incredible thing to find out when I go different places and talk about Scattered Abroad, or I let them know what we're doing when I'm giving a report on Memphis. I always highlight Days Gone By because most churches probably still have cassette tapes somewhere that they don't know what to do with them. And our guarantee is never we use 100% of the stuff that we get. We'll use everything that we can use. Sometimes tapes get fed through and they don't work, unfortunately. Sometimes, we've gotten in a couple of batches. Was it Whitney Houston? One cassette tape of Whitney Houston and some others. Obviously, we can't use that. Although that would be a hysterical Days Gone By, bait and switch on April Fool's Day. We'd get sued very quickly. But so we have some things that come in like that too, where it's obvious we can't air that stuff. And then there's other times where maybe a preacher, he's had a sermon from someone that we wouldn't necessarily want promoting, but he was studying the subject matter and it's still in the files of the cassette tapes. And so we never promise to use everything we get, but we promise to digitize everything we can digitize and give everything that we can back to the congregation as well if they want those digital files when we're done with them. And so I'm thankful for the work that you do with that, Matt, because I know it's not just I'm going to wake up and just spit this through in 5 minutes. You listen to each of these sermons. You take the time to catalog and categorize and try to figure out where they belong and where they should go. And so that's a time-consuming process, and we're certainly grateful that you do that. Matt, leadership is sometimes let me just say it this way. Matt and I like to joke around, and so this podcast will probably have some moments of that. We're just really enjoying each other's company, I promise, okay? But leadership, and I mean this sincerely, that's why I had to say that first, because Matt might think I'm messing around when I say this. Leadership at times can be one of the most frustrating things that someone deals with. And there's a lot of ways that that's the case. My degree is in ministerial leadership. And one of the things that I learned in my 2 years studying for that, my master's, was there are so many situations that happen with leaders and leadership that you and I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And we just see the end result of the meeting when they get up and announce the change or announce the decision. And there can be plenty of times where it doesn't go our way. And so the easiest thing in that moment is to walk away and take away from that. Well, these guys don't know what they're doing. They have no clue how to lead. I would do such a better job. And I think that that's why this is such an important, episode to have. And I think it's important that both of us have been full-time ministers. You're still in full-time local work. And we've both sat in elders meetings throughout the years that we were in local work. And we sometimes had decisions dealt down that we didn't like or that we didn't agree with necessarily, not scripturally speaking, of course. Obviously, we'd want to take a stand there. But we've had some times where we really wanted this to be done. The elders or the leadership didn't agree, didn't see it the exact same way. Well, we can't just change their minds. We can try to make a case if they allow us to do that. But if the decision is made, we just have to move along with it. So let's talk about for a little bit some of the things that, for the person who's listening to this that says, I've never been a preacher, I've never been a deacon, I've never been an elder, and I don't understand, what the leaders are doing. What causes us to feel the need to complain about the leadership?
Yeah. Well, I think there are really two things that um, really comes into play, and there might be a third one, but I think that it's probably not the case. I'll go ahead and name the third one. The third one is that you are capable of doing their job, and it's frustrating, and so you want to do their job. Um, I think likely if that's where you fall, you probably are an elder. So that I think, or you are on your way to being an elder, I guess. But and then also I think a part of that, then you're also not going to be complaining, because if you're capable of doing it, then you're not going to complain about it. But people who complain are people who really have not been there. They are not leaders. They don't know what it's like. They complain because they don't like something. Maybe they wish that they were in charge, but typically by nature, they are not someone to be in charge. Let me give you two examples, I think, of what this looks like. I have a counseling background, and I think that there are two things here that really fall into place that I've seen. There might be more, but these are the things I've seen more often than not. And that might be that someone is narcissistic
Mm,
and they just think, well, hey, and maybe they're not diagnosably narcissistic, but they're getting there. Someone who is narcissistic believes that they are better than other people. They fantasize about having power, success, attractiveness, whatever. They tend to exaggerate their achievements or talents. So they might be mediocre, but man, they think that they're great. And then everything else is somebody else's fault. If something doesn't go their way, it's not because, well, they did anything. They're not responsible for anything, because, remember, they're awesome. And so it's got to be somebody else's fault. They also fail to recognize anybody else's emotions but their own. They just think about themselves. Um, they expect others to go along with their ideas and plans. Nothing, no pushback at all, because remember, they're great. They have the best ideas and everything. So I think that is a big one. But there's another one that people probably would not realize is probably a big culprit. And I think that this is the bigger of these two that I'm mentioning. And that is someone who has an inferiority complex. And you go, well,
mm,
wait, just a second. Does that mean that they don't they think that they're inferior? And it was like, well, yeah, maybe they might think that they're inferior, but a symptom of an inferiority complex is not only a lack of confidence, but you can actually have arrogance in an inferiority complex,
mhm,
making you feel superior to other people, having an inflated sense of pride. This is perfectionism is a symptom of inferiority. So there are different things here, but when you think about having an inferiority complex, though, how would that look whenever you're talking about someone complaining about leadership? Well, again, it's the same thing as the narcissistic person. Hey, yeah, man, if I were doing this, I'd do better. And I, I'll for guys, I've got a perfect illustration for guys. Sorry, ladies, if you're listening to this, this is but the perfect illustration here is the armchair quarterback.
Yes.
And you like, man, I could have done that. And so I try to watch out for myself. I try not to do that and go like, because I mean, look, I am far from my prime days, so there's no way I could do
Yeah.
anything that these guys are doing. But I will complain about this. Yeah, I have been watching Alabama football for years, and we have a starting quarterback named Jalen Milrow. And he throws this perfect deep ball, and it looks so pretty. But if you ask him to throw anything within 20 yards, the things that I could probably hit, I can't throw anything past that, but I can hit those 20-yard ones.
Yeah.
Man, anything within 20 yards, his numbers are so low for that. And it's
Yeah.
like, it's disgusting. Like, what? How can you not hit those? But you can hit those like 60-yard bombs. How can you do that and then not hit these little short throws? And so, you think about stuff like that and you go, oh man, I could do that. Man, and you armchair quarterback that one.
Yeah.
So I remember Curtis Cates when I was in school and he had gone to Alabama, and he said, when I was when I was at Alabama, and he was at Alabama when Bear Bryant was there, and he said, "Did you know that I was a better coach than Bear Bryant?" And I was like, "What?" And he said, "Yeah, I'd sit up in those stands. And I'd be like, come on, why did you do that?" And yeah, it's real easy to look at someone else doing their job, and when they mess up, go, I could have done better.
Yeah.
But how do you know if you've not been
Right.
there?
And I think that example you gave is such an incredible one because it's very appropriate. Matt, you've been in my office. There are pictures of you in my office, anyways. We talked about that on the Did That Really Happen episode with you. So if you're listening to this and you don't know that story, finish this episode and then go listen to that. Did That Really Happen with me and Matt from a couple years ago? But it's not hard to know that I like football. And it does not take long in my office for someone to figure out that I like a certain type of team, with the Steelers. And so all of that is so easy because I find myself sometimes watching the games and going, come on, Tomlin, I could do better. If I know what, and I do agree that, like you said, there are some times where it's easy to say, if I know we're running it on third down
Yeah.
because I've been watching this team, then everyone else knows
Everybody
too.
knows. Yeah.
But if somebody, like, for example, that I'll talk about this since you mentioned Jalen Milrow. We were in the Brandon Ayuk sweepstakes a couple weeks ago, and there was this big talk, and it was your Broncos that apparently killed that deal from happening because there was a three-way trade proposed where the Broncos would trade Cortland Sutton, the 49ers would give them a third-round pick, and then the Steelers would get Brandon Ayuk for a second and third round pick. And the Broncos said, no, we're good. Even though they've been trying to trade Cortland Sutton for the last 3 years, they said
Yeah.
no. Well, the frustration as a fan is, man, we may have put all of our eggs into one basket there because we didn't really go out and get another good wide receiver. We didn't really sign any of the free agents that were available. And now most of the guys that are available are not really number 2 receivers anymore. They might not even be number 3 or 4. And so now you're looking at it, and it's in the Steelers community chat on Bleacher Report. After it happened, there were 2 things happening. One, all the 49er fans showing up and just giving us trash because, we re-signed Brandon Ayuk, and y'all thought you were going to get him. But then the second thing that I kept seeing was, man, Tomlin and Omar Khan need to go. And I'm thinking, now, wait a minute. I don't like that we didn't get Brandon Ayuk either. And I wish we had gone and done something better in the offseason to improve our wide receiver room this year. We drafted Roman Wilson from Michigan. Maybe he's going to be great. But if he doesn't pan out, then we certainly made a misstep in that department. But I don't know what the trade conversation, looked like. I don't know what phone calls were being made and how often Omar Khan was calling and doing different things. I've seen clips of Hard Knocks where people are talking to GMs constantly trying to work out trades and they don't come to fruition anyway. And so it's very likely that we did the best we could and the answer was no. But it's easy for us, like you said, the armchair quarterback to just say, I could have made that trade. Well, yeah, in Madden, a lot of trading is easy. When you play the game
Mhm.
Madden, or if you're in college football, it's easy to recruit a 5-star. In real life, though, there are different variables that come into play with this that we don't know and we're not privy to. And I think that is a deep, deep illustration because the next time I feel inclined to complain about the leadership, the question that I think I would encourage all of us to ask is, have I been privy to the conversations that they've been having?
Mhm.
If the answer to that is yes, then I have the authority to at least say, okay, well, I'm in the know. I know what's been going on because they've informed me what's going on. And then I might be able to say to them, I really wish we had done this differently. I'm going to support you, and because it's not an unscriptural choice, but in the future, I think we could have handled this differently. That's different than complaining about the leadership. When you're telling the leadership itself, hey, I think we made a misstep here. But if I don't know what's been going on in, closed doors and behind closed doors, then I need to keep my mouth shut and need to keep it to myself and realize that they may know something more than I do. And I don't know how many
Yeah.
times elders have had to let a preacher go or had to make a decision to withdraw from somebody. And maybe the wisdom that they employed in that moment is we're not going to talk about it. We're not going to go on record and air out all of this dirty laundry that we could air. We're going to let people know if you have a problem with this decision, you can come talk to us. And if people would go and do that and talk to the elders would then let them know what needs to be known for them to justify the decision that was made. But I think there's two sides of this coin. We'd love transparency, and I get that, and I would love it too. I'd love for Mike Tomlin to stand up and say, we're going to start Russell Wilson because we don't think Justin Fields is any good. But that's never going to be what a coach says. The coach is always going to say, we feel he gives us the best chance to win. That's why we're playing him. And elders are very much the same way. And they're not going to get up on a Sunday morning if they have to announce that they're going to withdraw from brother so and so. They're not going to get up necessarily and say, brother so and so had 42 affairs and he was gambling on his paycheck and and list every single sin that he has done. They're not
Yeah.
going to do that. But they will stand up and say, we have been going through the process of church discipline. We have done everything we can. Brother so and so is struggling in sin mightily. And if you need any more information on that, you're welcome to talk to us about it. We're not going to air out dirty laundry, but unfortunately, it's time to withdraw fellowship from him. I don't know that there's anything wrong with that either, and I don't think it's fair for then me to sit there and go, I didn't even know brother so and so was sinning, but these elders don't know what they're doing. And that's often what happens. We don't know the details behind the scenes. We don't know what's been going on and the hours of conversations they've had with this brother, pleading with him to come back and begging him to do what's right. All we see is the end result, and it's easy, as you said. I think it's the greatest. It's the first analogy that popped into my mind too. We just armchair quarterback it and say, well, I would have done this better if I were in charge. I could do this greater. So is there anything more you want to add to that before I jump to our next thought?
Well, I'll add this. Because I think it's just kind of a, I think about, I'm trying to think like things for women as well, and for a wife and her husband's supposed to lead her, and maybe she thinks, well, I could do it better than he could.
Right,
And that's a dangerous thought anyway. But here's something to say. I mean, okay, so what if you can?
right,
So good job. What if you can? Okay, now how are you going to help in the future?
right.
Because you're not in that position. So are you helping or are you hindering? And that needs to be something that you ask yourself because, listen, I've got a great wife and I do the best I can to lead. And sometimes I I don't make the greatest decisions.
Mm,
And so it's like, well, and then my wife will point it out to me, And I'm like, well, yeah, that really wasn't that great of an idea, was it? But the buck stops here. I've got to be the one to ultimately make those decisions. But while maybe she could do better in a certain aspect, um, it's not her role, and
Right.
so, here it is, she needs to support me in my role, and so that's what she does.
Yeah.
And so that's what, we think about here with like our elders, especially, is going, okay, so I'm not in that role. I can't, and
Mhm.
especially some of us are not qualified to be in that role at all. Well, maybe we can make better decisions, but we're not qualified, so we can't do that. So how do we help? That should be another question. So,
Right. Well, and you think too, this obviously on a spiritual based podcast, we're going to lean more toward the church application and the, application of what we're talking about from a church setting. However, true to what you just said, the corporate mother that has to work, because of insurance needs or whatever else, she maybe has the ability to work a certain amount of days a week, whatever that is, could very easily complain about the person above her and be worried, they're not doing the right thing. If I were in charge, I could do this better. The person in the congregation, if there's a VBS committee and there's someone who has been placed in charge of that VBS committee, the person and the people on there, not just women, but men and women, could both be sitting there going, I could do this so much better than they're doing. And we get into that situation where we don't even realize that we're doing it. And that kind of brings me to this second thought. What are some hindrances that enable us to continue to complain about the leadership?
well, I didn't mean to do this on purpose, but I got two things for this one as well. One is selfishness.
Hmm.
Just thinking about what you want. Now, I mean, okay, so I guess maybe we need to back up for just a second. If this is scriptural, then you need to be taking it to the elders. Like you need to
Right.
be talking to them. If this is a scriptural thing with any leadership, take it up with them. Now, if this is not a scriptural thing, then you got to think about these two things. And so, being self-centered, basically, um, we see this theme going throughout the Bible. Um, that in Proverbs 11 verse 26, he that withholdeth grain, the people shall curse him, but blessing shall be upon the head of him that sells it. So there's that idea of being not being selfish. 2 Timothy 3, 1 through 5, but at the beginning of it says, "For men shall be lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, haughty, railers, disobedient parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection." So these are some hindrances when we're thinking selfishly.
Right.
Then we're not thinking straight, really. I mean, you're just thinking selfishly, think about yourself. And really, I've got this as a side, like a second thing, but these really just go hand in hand. But when you think about someone who is prideful, um, that's a problem here. That's a hindrance, because if like I said before, if you think that you're right, and and really the implication maybe is that you can't be wrong, um, that's a problem. Proverbs 3 and verse 34, surely he scoffeth at the scoffers, but he gives grace unto the lowly. So yeah, we've got to not think selfishly. We got to think humbly. We can't be arrogant. We can't be prideful. These are major hindrances to us, and it will enable us to continue to complain about the leadership. I mean, going back to that whole thing, listen, if you think that you're right, and you can't be wrong, um, then yeah, you've got a problem. I don't know how many times I've done this where I really had something in my mind, and I go, and this has caused me to think about a lot of things. But there have been several times and honestly, the things that I can think about, I cannot repeat because of, breaking confidentiality. But
Right.
I have oftentimes gone, I don't know why a person would do that. And I think of a couple of reasons why a person might do that. And I just cannot think of, you know, another reason. And I'm thinking of all these reasons that a person would do that, and they're bad. And the next thing I know, I find out the truth, and I go, there was another option I didn't think about.
Right.
And so you just don't know. And and sometimes that justifies everything. You know, you might think poorly of somebody because of the fruits of their actions, only to realize that there was a reason behind what they were doing, and it makes complete sense. And so when we are just thinking inwardly and we're not trying to think of other people, we're not trying to figure out what that there might be a possibility of being wrong in this scenario, then that's going to keep us complaining about the leadership and thinking that we're always right.
And I think that's the struggle, because you don't get to assess the decision made in the same time frame that they did.
Hmm.
You know, if at Somerville, when I worked there, before I was one of the preachers there, back in around 2008, they made the determination that we don't want to have an evening service anymore. A lot of our members live 40 to 45 minutes away, and they're driving all the way back home and then coming back at 6 for an evening service. Let's just have all of our services in the morning and still do 3 services, but do 9 a.m., 10 a.m., and 11 a.m. And that decision, I'm sure, was met initially with some pushback from some people. We don't like that. We don't want it to be that way. That's going to be really hard on our family with our kids. But the thing that is not seen is, rarely in the times that I've been privileged to be in an elders meeting and be a part of the decision making process, when it's been given that, that opportunity to me, rarely has any of those decisions come down to a quick 3-minute discussion.
Yeah.
It is almost always at least 30 minutes of talking and discuss it. What if this happens? Well, what about that? What if this takes place? What do we say if people come back and say this? And then we get up, as the elders would get up in the pulpit and announce it, and then we're a united front and we help them. But the people listening to it, this is the first they're hearing of it. And so it's easy for them to go, well, this is so crazy. Who would do this? Well, you got to take a moment and allow yourself. I'll do two things as well. Number one, go talk to them if you have an issue with what's been done, and just explain to them, I'm having a hard time understanding how we got to this point. How did this happen? Why did we get to where we're at now? If you hear, you know, logical explanation and conclusion back, and it's not a scriptural matter, back off and just accept the decision. The second thing is, don't let people do it around you. I
Yeah.
get so fed up of hearing preachers that I talk to and hearing members that I talk to and others, as I'm sure you've dealt with the same things, Matt, of someone saying, yeah, so and so, they were complaining about the elders yesterday pretty hard. Well, what did you say to them? Oh, I didn't say anything to them. Why not? It's something I talked about with Jameson last week, where he pointed out, we often don't want to complain about others if we know they're going to find out. And so we keep our mouth shut. Well, it's the same thing that I told the story about what Brother Mosier used to tell us in school. Was I had a binder on my desk, and if someone came in to complain about somebody, I made them sign their name to it. No one ever signed the binder. Well, I think that's the same thing with the eldership. No one will ever really truly want to complain about the elders if the elders are in the conversation. And that's sinful. To not even go and voice a discussion and a complaint with them, you're now gossiping and talking about
Hmm.
the elders behind their backs. In some cases, this can even lend itself and lead to slander of the eldership, which is also sinful. You can disagree with some things, as long as, again, they're not, you know, contradictory to the word of God. But you certainly can't go around telling everybody, here's why I disagree with them. And there's this second part of this, number two: don't let people do it around you. Don't let people fish around you either. In so many places you have to have a license to fish, where if you don't have that fishing license, you're not allowed to fish at that specific spot because it's owned by the government or it's, whatever. Well, you need to have that same mentality where you won't let people fish in your pond, so to speak, and try to pump you for information to see what you know and to see your thoughts and opinions on something. You tell them, I'm not doing that. That's not for me to do. And if it's a situation where, again, it's in passing, boy, they changed the color of the carpet. I really hate that. Boy, they moved the Bible class to after the second service. I really don't like that. You can say, I don't really love it right now either, but I'm going to give it a chance. You can be honest and say, I'm not a huge fan of the decision, but they know what they're doing. And I have full confidence that if they don't uh, see good results from this, that we'll walk it back and not do it anymore. But those are the two things that kind of came to my mind. The idea of go and talk to the people who made the decision, voice your concerns and frustrations to them. Don't go and complain to everybody else about the leadership. Or the second thing as well is, the mentality of don't let people do it. And if I know that Brother Joe, and Joe, if you're listening, I'm sorry, I don't know why I would
I don't
just
know who
jump
you
on
are.
you. But you know who you are and you know what you did. um,
Joe.
but
Ugh.
if Brother Joe's sitting there in the pew and they announce something, maybe they announce, we're going to stop doing a fellowship meal every Sunday with Churchy Church. It's just too hard on our members. We're not doing that. And Brother Joe's thinking, that's the only way I've been able to afford a lunch on Sunday for 3 years. He may want to turn to the person next to him and start rallying the troops, so to speak. And let's get together and let's let them know we're not going to take this. That's not how this should be. And it's
Yeah.
certainly not something that's scriptural to do. Do you have anything else on that you want to add before we jump to the last one?
Yeah, well, I had two things and I forgot one of them. But uh, with that last thing that you said, I don't mind mentioning this because I would sign my name to that binder for this one.
Right.
But I was part of a congregation where, um, I came in after they fired a preacher, and the preacher had been there for a long time. I think it was 17 years, and he was fairly well liked by the majority of the congregation. Evidently, behind closed doors, he was hard to work with. And, you know, the secretary of the congregation ended up gathering everybody together and having a meeting to, basically confront this issue. Did not invite the elders, of course. And then she headed up the meeting. And she was telling me about this whenever I got there. And I try to be really tactful about things. So I was trying to figure out what I was going to say, and I just decided to hit it head on. And I said, "Well, you need to repent because that was wrong. You should
Yeah.
not have done that. If I had been here and that had happened, then I'd been calling you out publicly. It's like that is wrong. I don't care who that benefits. Oh yeah, now I can remember what I was going to say. The other thing, if you don't like the leadership, maybe that's not the place for you. I'll say that
Right.
excluding marriage, you can't just get up and leave. Um, that you're going to have to deal with. Also, if speaking to women here, remember you chose that in the beginning. So, you got to figure out how to make that better. But when it comes to the church, it comes to your job. If you cannot get behind leadership, maybe that's just not the place for you. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. You need to be able to trust your elders. You need to be able to trust your bosses. And if you can't, then go find another place to work. Go find another
Right.
place to worship, and that's not necessarily bad. And I think though, there's a lot of people that don't trust their leadership, and usually it's not for good reasons. I think a lot of times it's just because they think that they could do it better. And they, of course, haven't fallen in line with all the stuff we talked about thus far.
And that's the hard reality that we have to face. I can't do it better if I'm not in that role. And I like what you said. If I'm not enjoying the decision making, then I can leave and I can go to another place, provided that I don't make a big fuss when I do. I'm reminded of the person that I've heard the story growing up from my dad. I don't know who originated the story. It might have been him, may not have, but I'm reminded of the story of the place that country church never had indoor plumbing. And the conversation began to happen, like, we need to have indoor plumbing. This should be happening by now. This is past time for us to have it. And one of the families heard that they were going to be going to doing indoor plumbing, and they rose such a fuss about that and made such a big deal over, I can't believe you're going to go and have indoor plumbing. You kidding me? This is wrong. We don't need
Yeah.
indoor and just this whole thing. And so they said, you know what? We're going to leave. Okay, there's nothing that we can do to stop you. And they
Mhm.
moved to a congregation that already had indoor plumbing.
Yeah.
And so, sometimes you complain about something, and when you finally put your money where your mouth is and you leave, you end up with the same issue that was going to be the case if you stayed. I remember my dad telling me years ago, I was complaining about something, and I said, I just need to go somewhere else. It was back when I was working somewhere, and I said, I just think I need to go somewhere else. This is a really difficult thing to deal with. This was almost a decade ago now. I guess it was a decade ago. And Dad said, if you leave this place and you go to the other place, you know what'll end up happening there, right? And I said, no. And he said, the same thing, just with a different person. The
Mhm.
same issue you're struggling with now, there will be that issue when you go to the next place and the next place. He said, there's not a perfect place to work. There's not a
Yeah.
perfect place. And I remember being so mad in the moment because it was like, my dad doesn't have my back. No, he was right. I mean,
Yeah.
he had it just exactly right. And so as we think about kind of bringing this to a close, let's talk about this final one, which I think is the one that, and I'll do my two first, and then I'll throw it to you to kind of conclude,
Mhm.
mainly because I'm scared that you will have stolen one of these.
Mm.
Um, some biblical characters who did and did not struggle with complaining about the leadership. The first one that came to my mind that did struggle was Martha. Martha goes to Jesus in Luke 10, and Mary is over here listening to the word being preached by Jesus, and Martha is distracted with all this serving in Luke 10 and verse 40. And she goes to Jesus and basically says, you don't care that my sister's left me to serve alone? You're a bad leader. That she didn't
Yeah.
say it like that, but that's what it means. Tell her to help me, which you should have done already. If you kind of read between the lines here, that very much looks like what Martha's saying to Jesus. You should have already done this. You need to tell her to help me. And I can't fathom being gutsy enough to say to the Son of God, hey, go tell them to do this and help me.
Mhm.
That takes some guts, and Jesus responds and says, you're worried and troubled about a lot of things, but Mary's chosen the better part, which won't be taken away from her. So almost as if Jesus is saying, back off. And, this isn't wrong what Mary's doing. And I'm not going to jump into action just because you don't like it. The second person that came to mind that did struggle with complaining about the leadership is Absalom, who stood
Mm.
out at the
Yeah.
gate in 2 Samuel 15 and would literally tell people in verse 3, your case is good and right, but there's no deputy of the king to hear you. And if only I were a judge in the land, anyone who has suit or cause would come to me, I'd give him justice. What's being overlooked by Absalom in that moment is it's just the chapter before this where Absalom goes and murders Amnon and flees to Geshur, returns back to Jerusalem, and then is forgiven by David. And the very next thing he does is going around telling people the king doesn't care about you.
Yeah.
If only the king loved you like I did. And the sad truth is, in Absalom's case, if he had been doing the right thing, he very likely could have gone to his father and said, hey, I think we might need a deputy to listen to all these matters that are coming in. And I think it'd be great is there any way I can help? But he didn't care about that. He wanted to steal the hearts of men, according to verse
Mhm.
6. And he did this for 4 years. Every day for 4 years, he's sitting there and talking to people and doing these things to steal the hearts of men. So those are two that kind of came to my mind of those who did complain. One of the ones that came to my mind that did not complain is David. David did not even though Saul was out to kill him and out to hurt him, David did not go around trying to rally a coup and bring all these people into the kingdom to overthrow Saul. And in some ways, you could argue that David, as the next king in line, could have justified himself in his mind saying, this guy's bad news. We got to get out. We got to get rid of him. But Jesus says, no, he was the Lord's anointed too. He was
Hmm.
anointed by God, and I'm going to let him be the leader and let him do what he needs to do. I can flee for my life. I don't have to love him, but I'm going to respect him. And the other person is obviously probably the one that I might step on your toes with this one. I don't know, but it's Daniel. And Daniel is one that no matter what was happening, complaining was not on the table. When it was what the king wanted him to eat, he doesn't go around and say hashtag not my king and all these kinds of things that, would let people know where he stands. He just simply goes to the person, as I mentioned we should do earlier, and says, look, could we do this for 10 days and just you then do what sees fit to you? It's almost like he asked for a competition, even though he didn't come out and say it that way. The way that he presents it as, give us 10 days, and if you don't like it after 10 days, that's fine, but give us a chance. And then the same thing happens in chapter 2. Daniel doesn't go around complaining. Can you believe Nebuchadnezzar is going to kill all these men and do all these terrible things? What a bad king he is. Chapter 3, his friends are not shown complaining in that regard. Chapter 4, 5, and 6, the same thing with other things that are going on. Daniel is always one that basically says, especially in chapter 6, the most famous chapter, I think, from the whole book outside of chapter 2 and 3, is Daniel saying, I don't like what's been done. I don't like that the decree has been signed, but I'm going to go through and pray to my God, which is what is required of me, whether the leadership wants me to do that or not. So
Hmm.
those are mine. I hope I didn't steal all of yours, but maybe I stole a few. Maybe I stole none. But I'm going to throw it to you now, and you can go.
Okay. Well, you think about that, and we could come up with several. I'll just go ahead and stick to one because I will not say whether or not you stole any of mine. Um, but uh, um,
I
but when you think,
refuse.
I refuse. This is ridiculous. Never coming on your podcast again. Um,
You're
but
not wrong.
yeah. Foreshadowing. Oh man. Okay. But yeah, so you think about the children of Israel. They do this over and over again.
Yeah.
And then you have Moses, who now he's guilty of this a little bit. I mean, he he does, complain to God um on a couple of occasions, but primarily speaking, the things that we have about Moses, he is in the right while the children of Israel are in the wrong. He's being obedient to God and the children of Israel are not. So just some examples of this, Pharaoh, made things hard for them in Egypt. And then, Moses comes and they're complaining again. And Moses comes, remember this day on which you came out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. For by the strength of Jehovah brought you out from this place. And so he says, look, God God has been with you through this. Now, Pharaoh made it hard, but God is on your side. You go back to the Red Sea, you know, oh man, here they come complaining again in Exodus chapter 14. Oh man, what we should have just stayed in Egypt. It would have been better for us to be with the Egyptians than to die out here in the wilderness. And so, but then Moses, of course, talks to them and gets them back on the straight and narrow. Exodus 15. Now, if you're counting with this, I don't know that you are, but this is chapter after chapter, by the way.
Wow.
13, 14, 15, 16, just complaints. You have the bitter waters in chapter 15. They murmured against Moses, saying, "What are we going to drink?" Exodus 16, they complain about being hungry. Exodus 17, again, they complain about being thirsty. That's when Moses strikes the rock. They complained that Moses has been gone too long when he goes up on the mountain in Exodus 32, and so then he comes back down to see that they have, made the golden calf, and they're doing other heinous acts, and so Moses, makes them grind up that image, and he throws it in the water, and they have to drink the water. And then they complain about food again in Numbers 11. Numbers 12 specifically, you have complaints by Miriam and Aaron about Moses' leadership. They don't like it. You have again complaining about Moses in Numbers 14 about the promised land, going into the promised land. You have a rebellion against Moses in number 16, Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. They're thirsty again in Numbers 20, and they're complaining about that. Well, you're going to kill us. Why has Moses brought us out here? And so then, that's where he strikes the rock. That's when he does something wrong there. But and then you have the fiery serpents in Numbers 21, continuous things where there are complaints, and the complaints are either directly about Moses, about his leadership, or about God and God's leadership, because God is ultimately behind all these things. Moses is just the face because nobody's seen God. But Moses is the face of this whole organization, if you will, and so they complain about Moses. Really, they're complaining about God the whole time. And I think even too, when you think about that, you go back to people in general, like today, complaining about something, and whenever someone complains about something I've taught, I just go, well, you know what? You're not really mad at me. You're mad at God, because
Right.
I mean, I didn't come up with this stuff. I'm not just preaching what I want to preach. You know what? If I preached things to make me more popular, I could have a mega church somewhere, because I could just say the things that people want to hear, and entertain the people, and be just fine. But that's not what God wants us to do. We're going to talk about what God wants us to talk about. We're going to do things God wants us to do, and so that limits us to only the Word of God, and that's a good thing. But when people complain about that, you know what? They're complaining about the true leadership. They're not complaining about the preacher, not complaining about the elders. They're complaining about the true leadership that comes from God.
And that's the hard part. Complaining's not going anywhere. It's so easy to do it, and I find myself more and more finding out that I try to justify so hard complaining when I've got a good life and I'm doing okay. God has provided, God takes care of me. And yet here I am frustrated, and I saw a picture kind of bringing it back to what we were talking about earlier. That was funny. Just one more week until I let a team determine my mood for the next 4 months. It's so accurate, and it shouldn't be that accurate, but it is. I mean, it's so easy to watch the Steelers, or in your case, Alabama or Denver, and be so angry that they lost. And like, because I asked my sister-in-law, who's also a big Bama fan, I know it's Western Kentucky, but what did you think about the DeBoer era, kicking off? And she, stated, I'm worried he's not going to, beat them into shape, so to speak, like Saban would. And that there's some things that he will allow to be done that Saban would never allow. Well, that matters, and I can understand that complaint. But there is that old adage of Dr. Seuss, I think it's Dr. Seuss or Shel Silverstein, one of the two. It might have been Gandhi, I don't know, but don't cry because it's over, smile
Maybe
because
it was
happened.
Mother Teresa. I'm not sure.
Yeah. It could have been Tupac. No. No, but there's that joking I promised you guys earlier. The old adage of don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened.
Oh, that was
Be
Mickey Mouse.
thankful. That's right. I'm pretty positive it was Minnie,
Yeah.
but if Goofy or Donald Duck said it, we wouldn't.
It was not a Goofy thing. I can say that right now.
We would not be able to understand it.
No. Is he a dog?
I think so.
Okay. Pluto's a dog.
So there you go. That's the thing. Sometimes complaining.
Yeah.
It's easier to just look and say, hey, I still have a really great life. And this is not, I should not let this decision affect my mood every time I come into the Lord's church. Now,
Yeah.
just as the quick caveat, and then I'll throw it for anything else you might want to end with. Obviously, we're not talking about if an eldership got up on Sunday and said, hey, starting next week, we're going to have baptism days
Mhm.
once a month. Everybody that wants to be baptized can be baptized on that day. And you can say the sinner's prayer 2 weeks prior to that, and we're good to go. If that happened, obviously you have every right to start raising a fuss about that and
Mhm.
trying to
Yeah.
make sure people, um, you know, uh, make sure people know what's what.
Right.
At the same time, in the same ways, there needs to be an understanding of God wants what's best for you. He has put these people into the positions of authority over us, and I need to respect that and just get over myself. Anything else you want to add, Matt?
Yeah, I will say this because we've now, I mean, clearly we're talking a lot about the church, but maybe I'll add this for like the workplace. Um, Again, obviously, we need to put it in the context that these people are not Christians primarily. You may work for a Christian, that's great. Not everybody gets to do that. Um, and I mean, New Testament Christian, I mean, right by the Bible, not just professes some type of Christianity. I mean, like a true Christian. Um, but not everybody gets to do that. And you're probably going to be in a workplace where people want to bend the rules or, lie, cheat, and steal or whatever. And you need to remember uh, that they are not, they're not the standard. You cannot expect worldly people to live by the scriptures. Um,
Right.
but I will say that if that affects you in some way where you have to do something wrong, you need to get out of there. Um, but by and large, you just need to remember that you're in a workplace, you're in an environment where you are not in control, and so you can be like a Daniel, where you take what you get and you make the best of your circumstances.
Mhm.
I think that's what we're all going to have to do in that scenario. So um, I wanted to give that a little bit of admonition. At the same time, um, we need to be a little bit more understanding about leadership. Uh, and like I said before, if you just cannot get behind an eldership, if you do not trust an eldership, and there are elderships that I don't trust.
Sure.
And if they ever asked me to come and preach, I would say no.
Right.
I'd say I'm not coming. And I might even say that for a meeting and be like, I don't want to go. I don't want to spend a week with you. But that being the case, um, if you can't trust them because they're making unchristlike, not spiritually minded decisions, that's not the place for any Christian. Um, and so if you can't make any sort of positive impact to make it better, get out. That's what I'd tell you. But don't just sit around and complain. Complaining doesn't do anything. You can complain about something or you can do something about it. It's kind of like I've said this for a long time. But if you're overweight and you don't like being overweight, you can complain about it, be like, "Oh man, I'm fat. I don't like this. It's hard to just bend over and tie my shoes or whatever.
Right.
Whatever it is." And you're
Just get
complaining about
slip-ons.
it. Yeah, you get slip-ons. That's it. Yeah, but it's like, okay,
What I
well,
did.
you know, get like those shoe horns that have to. They're like 2 feet long. You don't have to even bend over. But yeah, like there's an easy fix for that for most people, and that is diet and exercise. And now, um, you can complain about anything else and go like, okay, I have the most horrendous handwriting. I don't know if you
Yep.
ever actually seen my handwriting.
I
It's pretty
have.
bad. Okay, so It's bad enough that Brother Mosier, when I was in school, he said, I've seen 1,000 preachers come through the school, and you have the worst handwriting by far. And I was like, ouch. that was in front of everybody in class. It was kind of funny, but I
Wow.
had a good relationship with him, so it really didn't bother me. But I was like, yeah, I got pretty bad handwriting. I know. Now there's a fix for that, and that is I could practice my handwriting if that bothers me. It doesn't bother me. If you can't read it, I don't care. I can read my own handwriting, and I'll send you an email if you need it. But yeah, I don't worry about that. But if I was worried about it, then I need to, instead of complaining about it, I need to fix it. So that's the thing is, don't complain, because complaining doesn't get anywhere. You need to try to fix it, fix the problem.
Well, what an what an appropriate runtime for an episode on complaining. If you have reached this 56-minute mark by the time I finish saying this word, see what I did there? It was perfect
Yeah,
on the dot.
so
Then you better not be complaining about us, or we will find you. And Matt will take pictures of him with your family and make it look like he stole your life. There's another teaser for the Did That Really Happen episode that you should go listen to now. Matt, thanks so much for being on this week and all that you've done for the network and continue to do. Next week, we will have BJ Clark, my dad, on the podcast, and the episode there is Quit Murmuring and Disputing. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about this, very likely talk a lot more about the Israelites on a deep level, and as well as what Paul's writing in Philippians 2 and verse 7. So just be aware that is coming up next week. And then after that, we will start a 4-episode arc on quit error. And we're going to talk about quit listening, quit ignoring, quit accepting, and quit teaching error. And so we're looking forward to that. And then after that, we'll talk about quitting with Haston Hanley. And I'm looking forward to that episode as well. Then we'll round it out with a Quit Being Immature series. Joe Wells will jump on for 2 episodes to talk about quitting pornography. He did a long season 18-episode arc of that on the Hey Joe show, where he did a lot of data and research and even discussed with people who were actively struggling in that addiction. And they were willing to go on record and say, no, I need to do this. It'll be good for me. It'll be good for my family for me to do this. He's going to jump on for 2 episodes and just kind of tell us what he discovered from that study. And then we will have our final 4 episodes after that. I believe an old buddy of mine, Dustin McCrickard, will be on one of those episodes. It's Time to Be a Quitter, talking again about the idea of motivating us to quit and being prepared to quit. And then we'll close out the last 3 with just me. Until then, let's remember to please God now so our eternity can be far better.